Welcome to a catalogue of conversations with friends, where we try to explore the complexities of life as we know it. I'm your host and your girl T, and this is Tea Time. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of my podcast. As you can maybe see if you are watching the video, I am alone today because I decided that I was going to do some sprinkles of solo episodes in between having guests, partially because it's a little tricky trying to get time with everybody given how busy people can be, and partially because at some point this was always going to be a solo podcast, but I had some concerns that maybe I didn't have interesting things to say or I couldn't handle it by myself. And then recently I came to the realization that, hang on, I yap a lot. This will probably be fine. So this is me trying out doing a solo episode for my podcast. If you are watching, you can probably tell I've got my little mic set up here. So I'm hoping the sound quality will be okay. And I also have some crochet here to keep me company while I am speaking. But I'm probably going to finish this in the time that half of this episode takes. So we'll see how we go. As you can probably tell by the title of the episode, this will be about why I have retired from dance. If you're new, you probably don't really know that I used to dance amateurly. I'm not a professional or anything like that. It's a hobby. But I did start dancing back in 2015. So it's been a really long time since I started. And I've been dancing pretty consistently since that time. So I can sort of say I've retired from it if I'm not planning on continuing to dance regularly. But I've retired for a little bit now. I think it's just taken me a little bit of time to accept that what I am doing is retiring. So for the friends who do know me more by the dance side of my life, you might remember I used to go to dance classes once, twice, 3 times a week. I used to post about it all the time. I was in a dance crew for 2 years. I went to LA with that dance crew. We trained, all of that stuff. So why am I now retiring? I've had a few people ask me about dance, and I think this is the reason why I've formulated the answer that I've retired, because it's just easier to explain rather than, I haven't really been going to classes, I haven't been doing XYZ. And I think I sort of came to this realization through some time spent thinking, and also something that a friend said to me a while back. And they're someone that I knew from dance, so we sort of have that history/background, and they've stayed pretty active in dance, like they're a creative now, which is awesome. I love that for them. But I had been reacting to their stories and sort of replying to their stories, being like, wow, this looks amazing. And, I couldn't come to your class last time because of XYZ, but I'll definitely see you at the next one. And they were actually really nice about it. And they sent me this message where they basically were like, sweetie, I mean this in the best way. I do not care if you come to my class. If you don't come, I'm not going to cry about it. If you do come, great. But like, you don't owe me anything. You don't have to send me these messages about how much you want to come, etc., etc. Like, don't feel like you need to say this stuff if that's not actually how you feel. And I'm not gonna lie, they're probably gonna listen to this, but at the time when I read that or I heard that, I kind of was in a little bit of denial in the sense that I was like, okay, thank you, but like, I'm not doing that because I care about what you think, being honest. I post that stuff, or like I send those messages because I want to. Like when I send that to my friends, I actually mean it. Like, wow, you look great. Or like, oh my God, I wish I was in that class. Because I do wish I was in that class. But also thinking about it more deeply, there's a reason why I wasn't in that class, in those classes, or, with them at that time. And as much as like my brain wants to hold on to this reality where I'm still active in the dance community and I'm still partaking and going to classes and all that stuff, like physically my actions don't align to that, right? And so this isn't something that's probably new in society. Lots of people will say one thing, but then do the other thing. And it takes a little bit of time to sort of reconcile and come to terms with the fact that like you have this idea of yourself. But then if you really look at your actions and your behaviors, it presents a different self. And this dissonance is where a lot of people will generally, take steps to change their life so that it more aligns. Whether that is changing the belief that you hold about yourself, or changing the actions that you do so that it more aligns with the version that you tell people that you are. So like for me, that ended up being a lot of thinking and sort of coming to the realization that, hey, you know what? I'm not going to be going to these classes, even though I say I want to be. Like mentally, I do want to be there. I do think it's really cool and all that stuff. But like, if you were to ask me on any given day if I was going to actually go to dance classes and all that stuff, my answer would be no. It would be An unashamed no also, because I think I used to hold a lot of shame about, I guess, all of my dance friends still being so involved and active in the dance community and caring about their growth and, like investing the commitment that you need to put in to see growth in that area. And there was a little bit of shame I think that I held, not because of anyone else's pressure, just to sort of give up on something that I put so many years into. And I guess it took a little bit of time and a little bit of compassion to sort of realize like, hey, you know what? If the season for you for dance has passed, that's fine. Like, people grow out of hobbies, people grow out of friends. It's not actually anyone's fault. It's just this thing called life where people change as they get older. And like, that's not the only thing that's changed in my life since I became fun employed. And to be fair, I think I quiet retired / semi-retired from dance way before I took my career break. So it's not really anything that's just happened because of that trigger. But yeah, basically I just decided that I am going to stop telling myself that I'm the kind of person who just isn't going to this class because she's busy or isn't going to that class because of budget, and just be honest with myself a little bit when I say I'm not going to go to this class because I don't feel compelled to, as hard as I feel compelled to stay at home, if that makes sense. And like when I explain it to other people in the beginning before I sort of had this word for it, where I was retired, I would sort of say like, I don't really feel compelled to go to these classes, to develop these skills, to explore these fundamentals, like all of this stuff, right? And I've had people express the same to me, being like, yeah, I feel the same. Like, one being, I think the dance community just isn't really the same as it was many, many years ago. Melbourne, especially compared to places like LA, even places like LA I've heard have sort of lost a bit of that energy, but like the culture itself has changed, right? And so it's a different vibe and a different feeling. And I think on some levels I knew deep down that it just wasn't something for me anymore at the stage of my life that I'm in. And I don't regret getting into dance when I did, and the years that I put into dance and the time and the money that I did, because it brought me a lot of joy in the time that I was there. And like, so much of life is just making the most out of the joy that is available to you. So I think the time that I did spend being a dancer and like making that such a big part of my life, and then now making the decision that it's not going to be anymore, I feel like all of that is the right decision for me. And it's a different decision for everybody. But I think it was really valuable for me to be able to just have that time to myself and just sit down and be honest and contemplate and, think deeply and say, hey, you know what? I think I'm actually retired from dance, and that's okay. Like, I am okay with that to myself. But that's this thing that I feel like maybe sometimes people don't talk enough about, which is kind of ironic given what it is. But I read this article, I think it's called Staring into the Abyss as a Core Life Skill by Ben Kuhn, Kuhn. I'm going to put the link in the description of the video and the podcast. It was a really, really good article, and it basically explains this idea that people these days, whether it be due to the rise of social media, all of these short form content appearing, whatever it might be, people are not spending enough time staring into the abyss, is what he calls it, quote unquote. What he really means is just thinking deeply about uncomfortable things or confronting things in your life. And he gives this really good example, like maybe you don't want to think about whether the person that you're with is the right person for you, because it's one of those things where the person that you're with, you're either going to break up or you're going to get married. And both of those are pretty scary ideas to confront, right? Not that you have to get married, but you sort of know what I mean. There's sort of an end game to some of it. You're going to stay with them forever. That's the alternative. And it's really uncomfortable to think about, because maybe deep down you know that person's not your person, and that means you're going to have to break up, and that's like a really confronting, scary idea, and you don't want to think about it. So you just don't think about it. You just do everything else but think about it, and you don't stare into that abyss. And then one day down the line, let's say you're married and you've been married 20 years and you're unhappily married, and you realize, well, crap, I should have known deep down. I should have known earlier that this was not the decision for me, but because you avoided staring into the abyss and thinking deeply about it, you've missed out on this opportunity to sort of make the right decision earlier on. And one of those examples that he gave was about people working in corporate. He specifically pointed out, I think, consulting and banking, or sort of like professional corporate roles. And he basically said that there's a lot of young people who don't think deeply about what they want to do, what their passions are, what their strengths are, things like that, before they sort of enter higher education or go into the workforce. And to be fair, he does point this out. A lot of young people don't have the life experience or the guidance or the opportunity or the privilege to be able to think about this kind of stuff deeply and to go explore their options. But, taking things at face value, there are a lot of young people who don't think deeply about what it is that they want to be doing with their lives. And so they end up just choosing something that's sort of in the middle ground, like, I don't know, commerce, arts, something really basic, right? Like a very transferable skill, because they're like, I don't know what I want to do. To be fair, that was me when I was young. I didn't know what I wanted to do either. I just picked commerce because it was like, oh, I could go into marketing or finance or accounting, or like it's so transferable. And to be fair, I do work in corporate now, so it is a very transferable and very useful degree. But a lot of people who don't know what they're going to do just end up doing it as a default. And when they graduate, Ben, the author, basically describes how these people want to maintain some degree of, I guess, status in their job. So they want a role that sort of is impressive to tell other people about, but it's not necessarily something that requires a lot of investment upfront, like medicine or law, where you have to, sit the bar and do many, many years of study and placement and things like that. So a lot of people, Ben says, go into corporate, go into consulting, go into banking, because, it's something that your immigrant parents would be happy to hear that you've gotten involved in, but also at the same time, it's not necessarily such a huge barrier to entry that you're not going to be able to get into it with your fundamental degree. And then you work in that industry for a few years. And somewhere down the line, you sort of start realizing that, hey, I'm not fulfilled in this place of work, in this type of work. I don't feel like I'm making a difference. This isn't the kind of work that I want to be doing. And so people start getting burned out. And obviously, there's a lot of factors, especially in modern day post-COVID, of why workers are burning out. There's obviously the effect of changes to working processes, like people are now working from home and hybrid offices and forcing people to go back to the office and things like that. There's also rising cost of living, at least in Australia, and that places pressure on people on whether they stay at their job or go to another one or demand more pay from their job, things like that. I think in Western culture, there's also this, I don't know how to describe it in so many words, but there's this focus on work-life balance, or this rise of fulfillment in your work that's becoming more and more important to younger generations, where a lot of younger working folk are sort of suddenly taking note of, hey, do I actually identify with the work that I do? Am I proud to tell people that this is the work that I do? Do I feel fulfilled on a day-to-day basis? Do I feel like I'm making a difference in the world? Am I more than just a cog in a machine, right? And that's not something that any of our parents really ever had to contend with as strongly as an aspect of their identity, I think. Like, I spoke to my parents recently and I was reminded of just how privileged we are as a new generation / in a Western country where you have the privilege to wonder about what it is that you actually want to be doing. Like, if I was still back in China, my parents were reminding me, my life would be pretty hellish. Not only would I have studied my ass off in school, like way worse than what I had to do here in Australia. Australia's had it really, really easy, apparently, compared to most other places in the world. But the job market right now, even if you get a job, the risk of being let go, like everything is in turmoil in China right now. And they basically sort of reminded me how good we have it here, which I totally agree. I think it's amazing the opportunities that they've been able to give me as their child, as a child of immigrants. But it's like when you live in this fishbowl, you don't realize what the temperature difference is between this and the ocean. Like, you sort of just know this as your normal. And so many people who grew up in Western society or were born into this culture that normalizes this focus, or this rising focus on your identity, the different aspects of your identity in relation to that, the role of corporation or like your work and society and like all this stuff. It's this really laser focused, really exposed, naked way of looking at your life. Whereas people in my parents' generation, they didn't necessarily have that luxury, right? Like, my parents were basically just thinking about, okay, whose job is going to pay for the rent and the groceries, and then whose job is going to pay for the school? That's literally all they had to worry about. There was no, does my job resonate with what I need to do? It was very much like survival instincts sort of priorities. Whereas, yeah, like I said, a lot of us, even though there are many people under cost of living pressures, they are still thinking about, this isn't the kind of job that I want to be working, even when I have a mortgage to pay, or I have rent to pay, and I have mouths to feed, and I have this and that. Even in crisis mode in Western society, in modern society for younger generations, that's still such a big part of things that we're worrying about compared to our parents' generation, I think. Anyway, as I was saying in Ben's article, all these people who didn't know what they were going to do when they were younger start burning out in their corporate jobs, and then they eventually end up, quitting because of that and trying to find out at that point, at that stage in their life, what is it that I actually want to do, and then trying to make the pivot and make it sustainable and viable. And it's crazy to think about, because when you actually stand back and think about how many jobs or types of occupations exist in the world, it's actually mind-blowing. There are people out there whose jobs are just to hand make dentures. Did you ever think about that? I think everyone just probably assumes a lot of things are just made in factories, and so people are just not involved. But I'm seeing, morticians. Who's studying to be a mortician? Do you know someone studying to be a mortician? Because there are morticians. And there are people who would love being morticians. You probably know someone, and you're like, hey, you know what? If I was to describe these working conditions to you, and, if you have an interest in death or whatever, this is a great fit for you. But no one would tell a 12-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 17-year-old, 18-year-old graduate, this is a really great career path for you. Or even trade. Why are some people going to trade right now? Why are the young people in Australia moving into mining? It's for money. It's for HECS. It's not even because someone said, oh, I'm really into, whatever aspect of mining that really fits what my needs are as a working professional. And so a whole swath of people basically miss out on the opportunity to really get into the careers that they want to from an early age and develop their careers and, learn the pitfalls and things like that early enough for them to be able to, by the time they're in their mid-30s, late 30s, 40s, established in their career, they sort of understand, hey, this is, where I want to be. This is where my talents are being utilized fully and recognized. This is where I feel fulfilled. There's not really any of that. There's just a lot of people with consulting and banking on their LinkedIn. So if you know someone who works in corporate, not to say this is my personal experience, I actually think there are lots of people who thrive in corporate environments. There are definitely people who are built to be in consulting, to be in banking. It's just not everyone. It's not all of the lots and lots of people who are going into consulting because it's their number one choice, because it's prestigious enough to make their parents proud, but also at the same time pays well enough. And it's not so specific that you're locking yourself out of other job markets in the future. The roles that I'm doing recently in my workplace, I think is a really good fit for me and my skills. And it took me a long time of experimenting in my workplace to be able to get to that point, which is also why when people ask me about going back after my sabbatical, I think it's a great place for me to develop my skills in the areas that I want to work in the future with the people that I know. Whereas for some other people I've spoken to, they're not necessarily thinking about it that way. And it's pretty clear that that's not the place for them, or it's not the career for them. It's not the industry for them, whatever it might be. So all of that is to say, I read that article maybe a few months ago, and at the time I didn't think too much of it because I have a very long reading list. But since reading that article, I keep coming back to this idea of staring into the abyss and thinking about how little I think about things. And I don't know if after listening to this episode, you're gonna turn off your phone and just sit there in silence for a little bit, or maybe go for a walk. I find that that's the easiest for me. But just try and think about something that you have thought of recently that you're like, oh, I should really think more about this next time, and then just didn't. And it's not gonna come to you easily, especially if you're not used to meditating or sitting with yourself, being still. That kind of stuff comes with practice, I will admit. And I'm not necessarily well versed in it either, but it's such an enlightening moment, and it's so important to be, I think, connected to yourself, so that when you make decisions like, I'm going to retire from dance, I'm going to stop going to book club, I'm going to move to another state, I'm going to change my career, I'm going to break up with my partner, I'm going to ask my partner to get married, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Those are decisions that you have actually spoken to yourself honestly about. I think a lot of people don't take that into account. I've spoken to many friends in their times of crises, and I'm sure you have as well, where they come to you with this issue of, I don't know, whatever that it might be, right? I don't know what to do about blah. I don't know what's going to happen with blah. I feel lost about blah. And obviously you're there for moral and emotional support, which I always am. But there's also this element of I can't give you the answers. No one can give you the answers. A lot of the times it's a situation where you have to decide. It's a decision that you have to make. And I said this in the previous episode, and I will say this forever. A decision is just a decision. There is no right or wrong decision. There is the consequences of a decision, but you don't know what the consequences are going to be until you make the decision. So all you can really do is sit down and be honest with yourself about what exactly it is that matters to you and what you're willing to accept as terms of those consequences, and then just make the decision and trust yourself that no matter what happens, you're going to find a way through it. If it's the right decision, trust that you know what the right decision is and that you've made it. If it's not the right decision, and again, I'm saying right in air quotes here, if it's not the right decision, trust yourself that you're going to find a way out of it. I used to have a lot of anxiety with doing things. Like I would put things off because I would think, oh my God, what if something goes wrong? What if something goes wrong and I can't fix it? Like we literally have an issue with the tap, like a water tap at our place. And I've put off trying to fix it. When I say months, even just like looking up how to fix it, months. Because I was wondering, okay, surely like it's something you call someone for. But I was like, surely it's something you can do yourself. Surely it's not that hard. But I was thinking, okay, what if I turn off the water and I unscrew the tap and I can't put it back on? I can't turn the water back on. We're going to have no water in the house. I can't have that. And then we'll have to call a plumber. But what if it's late in the day and there are no plumbers? What am I supposed to do? We don't know anyone in the area. We can't take any showers. We can't cook. We can't even drink water. Like what are we meant to do? That kind of thinking, and then you end up being paralyzed. It's not helpful. There is like preventative thinking, but in terms of, things that you learn in therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy specifically, which is what I've done a little bit of in the past, that level of catastrophizing just doesn't really help. It paralyzes you, and at that point, you're neither learning from an experience, nor are you actually like going through it and validating yourself that you can actually do something. So there's a good level of thinking forward about stuff and trying to prevent bad things from happening. And then there's literally thinking the world is going to end and nothing is going to be able to fix it, and like not showing up for yourself and trusting that you're going to find a way through it and you're going to survive. I think that's something maybe more than a few people deal with regularly. So I guess this is your reminder that if you haven't sat with yourself recently and had an honest conversation about some difficult things in your life, whatever that might be, it might be good just to take yourself out on a date. And I know that's not possible for everyone, but even if you're a single mom, ask your neighbor, ask your sister, ask your family to look after your kid for like 30 minutes while you go down the street to the coffee shop or go for a walk. Making that time for yourself, that's self-care. It's not face masks, you've probably read online. It's not face masks, it's not candles, it's not all this stuff that corporate is trying to sell you. It's literally just making time for yourself for the things that matter. And a lot of the times that people don't think about, the things that matter is having these deep conversations with yourself and confronting difficult thoughts on decisions that need to be made. Because sooner or later, those decisions have to be made. And sometimes it's really important that those decisions are made as soon as possible. Or you start considering them as soon as possible. Every day that you do it earlier is one day that you gain. Anyway, so I've retired from dancing because I no longer feel like it's the season for me. I don't feel innately compelled, like I said, to go to the classes, to show up to the workshops. I see postings and I no longer feel that thrill of, oh my gosh, what's the class going to be like? How am I going to do? What am I going to learn? There's not really that brain chemistry anymore. I'll see it and I'll sort of say, oh, I know this person. They're really cool. That's going to be a really cool class. But there's no personal aspect to it. There's no insertion of my own psyche and experience. I've sort of taken the outsider's view. It's like I'm standing on the other side of the window and like I'm watching my friends perform in class and things like that. And it's still really fun to watch. Like I love watching the people that I know in the dance community do their thing and absolutely kill it. That infectious energy of dance, that'll never go away. I'll still enjoy watching a dance performance. But the aspect of it and the things that it brings me as a form of activity and like a social community, I just think at this point in my life, it's not necessarily something that I am going to be missing as much as I'm going to be missing the other things that are taking up that time. So if you knew me from back then and that was my whole thing, my whole era, it was in my bio, everything, just know I'm not shunning that part of me. I love that part of me, and the past few years that I've spent doing all of that, I think it was an amazing time, and the people that I've met, the opportunities that I had, the experiences that I've been able to collect, that's priceless. Like, that's a part of me that I've grown out of, and I'll forever treasure it because it made me who I am today. But sometimes it's just as important to be able to say, you know, this is not the partner I'm going to be with forever. This is not the job for me. This is the house that I'm going to buy. Sometimes those decisions are the important ones. And sometimes decisions like, I'm going to move on from this hobby, even though it's been such a big part of my identity for so long. And it's not going to mean that I'm failing or giving up or less than. I'm being honest with myself, and I'm actually taking care of myself because I'm recognizing other priorities that I have in my life at this point, and I'm willing to put those forward first. And this is me showing up for that. That's sort of what that means when I say I'm retired from dance. So if you see me in person upcoming and you want to ask me about it, feel free. Happy to have a chat. I think it's like a really interesting thing for me as well, because I've never really like actively retired from something. But I think it's also just a way for me to be able to reconcile when I see those things and I no longer feel that little spark in my chest, what that really means for me. Because, you know, it means I have more time to go to the gym and pursue things that I like. It means I have more time for other communities that I'm getting into, like crochet, and for my friends, and, you know, finding myself and spending time with myself and being still. You know, it's funny. I was with my parents recently and I told my mom that I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the fact that I'm getting older, and so I'm getting to that age where I can appreciate this kind of stuff. But I think this year is the first year that I've really noticed the color of autumn leaves and how beautiful it really is to be able to see just a forest of golden red colors and everything like that. And she told me, you can appreciate those things because you've finally slowed down. And that was actually so crazy to me because it's so obvious. Like, I never thought about it that way. But obviously, being on my sabbatical, I'm not working. And in the day-to-day, you can feel a little bit like, oh my God, I'm not doing anything. Like, it feels a little guilty, and like you have to spend the day being productive and things like that. But I feel like after so many months of being on my sabbatical and taking things at my own pace and exploring the things that I want to and saying no to things like retiring from dance, you start noticing symptoms of this slowing down in things like, I literally went for a walk yesterday and we walked past a strip of grass on the nature strip, and I literally stopped in my tracks. I'm not even joking. This is like comical what I did. I stopped in my tracks and I stared at that patch of grass, and I said to my partner,
is it just me, or is that patch of grass really, really green?
Like, if I can, I'm going to put a picture up here. I think I took a picture of it, and it doesn't show up very well on the picture, but it was so green. Like, I had never seen grass that looked so fresh. If I was a cow, I would be mesmerized. Like, I stood there staring at that grass for like 3-4 seconds. Like, I just stared at it, trying to understand how grass could be so green. It was beautiful. And it's crazy when I say it out loud, but like genuinely those moments, that's a sign that you've like slowed down and you've taken the time, and your body starts noticing these things because you're having time with yourself and you're paying attention to the small things. I mean, mind you, I've always been someone who pays attention to the small things, like, I don't know, bugs on the ground and like flowers that smell good and birds in the sky and stuff like that. Like, that's just how I've been always. But even still, there's still ways that my body, I guess, surprises me now that I'm on this period of my life. And I still feel like because of all of these changes due to me being on break and doing all this stuff, I still feel like there are things about myself that I'm learning regularly. And it's kind of cool because I feel like on some level at the end of this sabbatical, at the end of this break, I'm going to know myself better, which is very exciting because that's always been my goal, is to like know who I am and show up for who I am and stand up for who I am, kind of. And I know it's going to be a slow process, but it's cool seeing like stuff like this happen where I know I'm into autumn leaves now. Like, I think autumn leaves are so beautiful and all of this little stuff. I don't know. Anyway, all of that being said, that's going to be today's episode. I'm going to keep it a short one. I don't know how long these episodes are generally going to be, but I think from episode 1, I've decided that these are going to be a little bit shorter. If you have any thoughts on my solo episode, please let me know in the comments. That would be super, super helpful. If you have any encouraging words, I also love to hear those. Pop them in the comments. This is obviously available on YouTube and Spotify, so please make sure to check it out on both platforms. Subscribe wherever you want to, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Thank you very much for listening. I will chat to you later. Bye!